Вітаю, мене звати Hlib Vyshlinsky, я виконавчий директор Центру економічної стратегії.
Good afternoon. My name is Hlib Vyshlinsky. I'm the Executive Director of Center for Economic Strategy. We are together on our common event, together with the German economic team, and basically we are making the review of the Ukrainian economy for the previous months. We are also discussing the topic that is the special topic, most interesting topic of this month. And the topic of our today's event, does Ukraine have enough gas? And where to take money for the upcoming heating season. Technical aspects, housekeeping, as usual, since our event is taking place in the form of the webinar. You can ask questions in the Q&A, where the authors and the experts can answer in the online mode or in writing or via the replies. You can also exchange opinions in chat. We have simultaneous translation into English. And all the materials from this event are available from the website of the Center of Economic Strategy. At the moment, colleagues in the chat, they will be adding these links, and you will be able to additionally look at them. And also we will have some recording on YouTube. The links will be sent to the registered participants in case you lose some part of this today's event. You can do this. We are doing this together with the German economic team, with the media support of the Economic Truth, Ekonomichna Pravda, and I want to pass the floor to Garry Poluschkin for a short introduction, who is the project manager from our German partners. Garry, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hlib and colleagues. Very happy to introduce today's webinar. My name is Garry Poluschkin. I'm project manager for Ukraine at the German Economic Team, a project financed by the German Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, and that is conducting economic policy consultancy to Ukraine's government in different spheres: economic policy, trade policy, financial stability, and so on. And since the war, jointly with the Center for Economic Strategy, we have supported and established this monthly report, this monthly event to bring together international and Ukrainian stakeholders to discuss very important topics currently in Ukraine's economic policy. And today's topic, very important topic of energy security, where we have seen last year, but also 2023, 2022, the challenges Ukraine is facing due to Russia's targeted attacks on Ukraine's energy sector. And I'm very happy to have this webinar to discuss what are the experience Ukraine can learn for the economic policy, for the energy policy from this past challenges, and what can be brought to the next winter for Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Garry. And now my colleagues will give a review of the economic tendencies and also the development of events for as of March and as at the mid-April. And after the colleagues, I will pass the floor to our partner for this event, Mr. Oleksandr Kharchenko, who is the Director of the Research of Energy Sector, who will make a review of the topic, of this special topic for today's event, and will also moderate the event further. Will also moderate the discussion with the specialized experts. Okay, coming back to this general review, passing the floor to Samoiliuk. Maksym is the economist at Center of Economic Strategy and the manager for our monthly reviews. Maksym, the floor is yours. Thank you, Hlib. Welcome to all the participants, all the viewers of our today's event and our traditional monthly review of the economy. This time we will start from the macroeconomic trends, because this month I have come to talk And there is a lot to discuss because the state statistics has published the information, statistical information regarding the summary of 2024 in terms of GDP. So in 2024, the real GDP grew by 2.9 year to year. That's below that was forecasted by the majority of the official forecasts, including the Ministry of Economy, World Bank or IMF. This situation happened because in the fourth quarter of 2024, for the first time over the 1.5 years, the GDP decreased by 0.1% year to year, mainly due to a sharp drop in agricultural output following a poor harvest. In case we exclude agriculture from the calculations, then, as our colleagues counted from Dragon Capital, GDP in reality grew in the fourth quarter by 3.3%. So exactly the biggest blow has been the agricultural poor harvest, and that also influenced not only the GDP as such, but also that streamlined inflation. Also, the Russian attacks on the energy infrastructure deteriorated GDP that finally increased the costs of the business and citizens for electric energy and for all connected expenses. At the same time, according to the Ukrainian officials, in 2024, the internal production of the domestic production of military production accounted for around 1/3 of GDP growth in 2024. That means that our military production complex is a significant driver of economic revival, and it will become the driver for growth even after the stopping or completion of the war. Any change of GDP change will depend, of course, on ceasefire or on peace talks. At the moment, we see that Russians are not that keen on fulfilling their obligations as far as the energetic ceasefire. Nevertheless, the future dynamics will depend also on that. In March, we are entering spring with some positive expectations, not only from business, who is for the first time for almost 1 year has some positive expectations, but also with some positive expectations of just simple consumers. Of course, consumers are more subjective in their views because in the beginning of the full-scale invasions, their expectations grew very highly and they were much higher versus the neutral level. But finally, the reality could catch them and the expectations were dropping, but now the expectations again exceed the neutral level. That's a significant indicator of what is happening in the economy, and actually the overall it's not bad that business and citizens look into the future with some optimism. At this, I will end my part and I will pass the floor to the colleagues. Thank you, Maksym, and thank you. Next, I will ask Mariia Tomilina, who will talk about the situation in the monetary, FX, and banking sectors. Masha, please, the floor is yours. Welcome to everybody. So let us start with the key policy rate. Today at the meeting of the NBU, they decided to keep 15.5%. This decision was dictated that this level of key rate satisfies the requirements in terms of bringing inflation to the target levels and providing stability at the foreign exchange market, and as well as making sure that the hryvnia assets are in check and control over the inflationary expectations. At the same time, you understand that the war remains one of the main inflation risks. Apart from that, we can see geopolitical uncertainty is increasing, and of course those military risks that we're talking about It's the significant expenses for defense, energy infrastructure damage that we talked about today, and well as migration trends and significant labor shortages. And the leg, in terms of inflation, in March this year, it continued to grow and reached 14.6% year to year, and within months, the prices grew by 1.5%. Once again, we can see bad harvests of the previous year, higher costs of the business, especially through increased costs for energy and labor, and also quite a significant demand from the consumer side. In case we look at the prices that grew most during the previous months, it's eggs. Yeah, quite surprising because it's Easter coming, and also it's footwear and clothing. In case we look at the reserves, the situation is somewhat better. They grew in March. They are $42.4 billion US. That's enough to cover 5.2 months of future imports, which is quite a good indicator. This growth was driven by substantial inflows from international partners. Then the NBU spent, and about this is from international partners, my colleague will explain to you a little bit later. Also, that improved the situation on the foreign currency market. We can see the further revaluation of hryvnia, appreciation. It's the first time when the FX intervention of the NBU were much less, and there were fewer expenses for the funds that arrived in international currency in order to pay taxes, mostly from our agricultural sector. And we got quite a stable exports as well, so to a certain extent, this helped to improve expectations regarding the FX exchange rate. Hryvnia continues to strengthen gradually, and now there is not that much of a difference between the official and the market rate. So, and finally, in this part, we would like to talk about deposits and lending. We can see rising across most categories for household deposits issued in hryvnia, including some long-term deposits. Also, in some foreign currency as well, there is a growth. We can see that the key rate increased. That means that also the deposit rates also slightly improved. As a consequence, people are continuing to invest the money into banks. And in terms of lending, irrespective of such a high key rate, this is much higher than was previous year. In any case, the lending continues, of course, in the first place in hryvnia. At this is all from my side. Thank you. Passing the floor to colleagues. Thank you, Mariia. We need to add to the analysis the exchange rate hryvnia dollar, the euro hryvnia rate, because this month this euro dollar pair was very much volatile, and we have not seen such a strengthening of euro. But these are some global tendencies rather than the Ukrainian global tendencies that we're talking about in our review. And now I'd like to pass the floor to Yurii Haidai, who is the senior economist, who will tell to us what was happening in the Fiscal Center. Yurii, please. Thank you, Hlib. Welcome to everybody. In the fiscal sector, we had quite optimistic figures. In March, we have 214 billion taxes revenues into the state budget. That's a record indicator, and if we compare with March previous year, this is the growth by 38%. And of course, the main driver was the CPT tax. It's a huge amount, of some 86 billion hryvnia, of which almost half, 42.2 billion, this was CPT from banks under the increased rate. This one-off. Also, there was significant revenues from the state-owned companies, 5.5 billion, and from gambling, 2.2 billion. So altogether, this contributed to this high level of revenues. We are also working how the advance contributions from CPT tax are working with fueling stations. It's going to be 280, 300 million hryvnia. In the end of the year, we will see whether it was effective. When it comes to VAT, we can see the growth year to year, 40% versus the previous months. This was same in February. Then we see quite significant revenues and moderate refunds, which give such a positive balance. And what is interesting, there is the opposite trend in from domestic and imported VAT. We can see that the imported VAT brought only 9% more than the first quarter of 2024, less than inflation. Maybe this is one of the factors that makes the pressure on hryvnia less and make sure that the National Bank doesn't need to intervene so much. And a very interesting component is the excises. So I have made an additional graph so you can see some details about it. The excises grew too much 2024 by 56%. It's almost twice as much. And the drivers is tobacco and fuel. They have added, if you look at the previous March, they get plus 65, 66%, especially the revenues from alcohol, which is quite surprising, stay at the same level as they were last year, and the rest of the sources are much less. So I would like to finally congratulate everybody that this law on increasing excise taxes and bring them in line with the European ones was finally signed by the President, if I'm not mistaken, on the 24th of March. And a little bit about the expenditures. For 2 months in January, there were expenditures, although small as usual, traditionally as in the beginning of the year, but they exceeded the expenditures by more than twice that we had in 24. The biggest growth was in the expenditures at the expense of the military assistance or defense in more from 14 to 132 billion, and also a significant related expenditures from the own funds, own resources, and what is collecting the state as far as taxes are concerned. Also, we can see some significant growth to debt servicing. It actually rose by 52% in January. In February, again, there's been more expenditures than in February 24, but only by 28% higher. And again, the largest increase again occurred in defense aid, which more than doubled in nominal terms. With this, we also see much less spending on social needs, but they can be also moved from month to month. So we need to look and we need to check back on some longer horizon to make some more conclusions. That's it from my side. Thank you. Thank you, Yurii. And as an additional advertising of our yesterday's event, I would like to add the ones who missed the event with the Minister of Finances. One of the questions that he replied, it was about the increase of expenses in the first quarter for defense. Who is interested? The explanations of the minister and how much this can influence or not influence to the budget of 2025. Once again, on our channels, you can look at it, and this event is fully available. We will be happy in case you do this. It's good that you did it yesterday. So the last part of our monthly event. With Mirlanda, please, the floor is yours. Thank you, Hlib. Thank you, colleagues. Let's start traditionally from the energy sector, in which we have net imports for electric energy decreased by 9% to 195 gigawatt hours because the heating season has already finished, and this heating season started. We can see some cold days in the beginning of March, especially in the beginning of April. There was an abnormally cold weather. We had to go back to significant imports of electric energy. And they actually exceeded 20 gigawatts per day. Also, there was a huge import on the 3rd of July. But again, this period went through without any additional disconnections, cutoffs, so the weather is the main factor, irrespective of the certain military problem. It is happening under what we call the energy ceasefire. Hopefully, maybe it's not seen, because on the 7th of March, until it was concluded, there was quite a serious combined attack of the Russian Federation on energetic and gas structure, and from the other side, and in case, people even are saying that the date, the Ukrainian side, whether it can be done, and take into account that the energy ceasefire was violated more than 30 times, but still it is actual. There could be some risks of attacks to some energy infrastructure. In case this ceasefire, that this will be not controlled, but according to the risks that are growing. In terms of metallurgy, that so far looks like the neutral trend, but we need to somehow explain this, especially that the American tariff war of this year will not have significant influence on the Ukrainian metallurgical, because the metallurgical company of Ukraine, it is taxed with 25% excise tariff, and it's also contributing to. Let us also make some summary of VAT, what concerns the metallurgical sector. That would be from Ukrainian GDP increased to 72.2% in 2024, after 5.7% in 2023. However, this positive trend has a very little chance of preserving, because in March, the peak production of Ukraine increased by 3%, steel production fell by 4%, as rolled products increased by 2%, but we are talking about March versus February, that is the month which has 3 days more. That means that the overall days, so it will not be optimistic. In terms of the global markets, the prices for the iron ore, the prices went down below than 100 tons per ton. Let me remind you that these prices exceeded $240 per ton, and basically the prices for the majority of the metallurgical products, they support this negative dynamics. So these indicators are higher, and we see that exactly in the second quarter there was this splash of metallurgical activity, and we don't see this in this year. In terms of the agrarian, the main event for the industry is exactly what is going to happen with the autonomous trading measures, trade measures. We discussed it in more detail last month. We would like to emphasize for the agriculture, the losses will be highest, some 7-8%, according to various assessments of the volume that can be lost in case these special trade measures are not continued. Well, the Minister of Agriculture says that it's not worth to expect the full return to pre-war trade terms. But in any case, hopefully compromise will be agreed shortly. But what kind of changes this will be, which products it will pertain, we don't have yet the final decision. The European Union negotiations are ongoing. And let's look at the exports of main cultures, the grains and oils in the amount of 4 million tons in March. This almost coincides with the dynamics of the last 3 months, and we can see that this is quite a significant horizontal trend. In general, the exports of the agricultural products in March is 5.4 million tons, and it had 2.1 billion in value, and that's 58% of all total exports that we exported in March. Corn was exported for $514 million and sunflower oil for $503 million. So they accounted together for half of agricultural exports, slightly more than 1 million tons of wheat for $364 million. Thank you very much for the attention, and passing the floor to colleagues. Thank you. Thank you. And we are coming to the sector that we talked about in more detail. And I believe that Oleksandr will talk why and what are the indicators that this sector depends now, and why it requires such a big attention that for the first time over the full-scale war, we have decided to make a dedicated monthly review to talk about it. So, and we understand there are some outside reasons, but also inside reasons. So Oleksandr Kharchenko, the Director of the Research of Energy, passing the floor to you for the further moderation of the discussion. Many thanks, Hlib. Many thanks for this invitation. Very interesting audience, and I think the discussion will be very much interesting. We're talking what is going to be with the gas. So we have a certain view over the situation that is happening as part of the Naftogaz actions within the last 2 years, and because of the aggressors' actions in the last 2 months, when the focus of attacks on Ukrainian agriculture from its high voltage to the gas production structure. In case we can open up the first slide. So what exactly we are talking about? We are talking about that for quite a long period, for almost 2 years of the war, and we can even say slightly more than 2 years, Ukraine was taking a position that we don't need imports of the gas. That was based on the public announcements, first of all, on internal production, but in reality it was based that before the full scale invasion in 2021, the pumping of gas was done according to the pre-war normatives. That means that in 2022 we pumped in the gas, taking into account that there will be no war, but the war happened. So as a result, there's been a 38 decrease in the usage of gas, which means that in the Ukrainian reserves, we saw the increased stock of gas, which we were eating up over the next few years without importing gas, declaring the huge success of internal production, which actually didn't change. So as a result, this year we were entering with some minimum over the period of war reserves of gas, and when the blows took place on the structure of gas production, especially on gas compressor stations, we lost the pressure in the system, we lost the access to own Ukrainian production, and basically the worst that could happen, that the system for a certain time that the system was not in proper pressure. We decided that issue with the imports of gas, and we could really say it. We didn't have any catastrophe, and nobody felt any changes. And there was a fantastic work of Naftogaz and as the gas transportation company and Укргазвидобування. So a huge part of the crisis was unnoticed for the outside eyes. Nevertheless, we lost up to 40% of access to own production, and some half of that we received the access, but the second part required more. We needed to buy some specialized equipment, quite heavy. It has to be brought in, it has to be installed, and only the cannibalization of the leftovers, that will be not enough. And that will bring the situation that, the next slide, that we are entering April with the historically lowest levels in our reserves, in our stocks, which are technically the lowest. So to take more out of the reserves, we can't. We couldn't. If we tried, we would expect a significant technical, I would say, catastrophe. I mean, not catastrophe, but really significant problems with our reserves, with our stocks. And the last thing which happened for us to be prepared until the next season, because over 33 years, the reserve that we had before the war, we would need to buy from 4 to 4.5 billion cubic meters of cubic meters based on the calculations of the Naftogaz Ukraine. But apart from, there were some alternative calculations that says we don't have this 1.5 cubic meters in case electric energy is using gas for the production of electric energy. So that is quite an arguable issue. It is being discussed among, I would say, the best experts in the sphere, in the industry, and to give the full comprehensive assessment is not possible because we don't know the weather forecast and we don't know how the consumers will act, whether the consumption will grow or not. But it's important to understand that there is such an evaluation, such an assessment, and this further discussion from my side, and the presentation is based on 4.5 billion cubic meters, but maybe we need significantly more. So we try to analyze the risks, what could prevent Ukraine to pump in this amount of gas. In our opinion, technical, significant problems, significant obstacles, technical obstacles in order to get the necessary amount of gas. We don't have that. There are some commercial, first of all, risks, and there are also some risks about the absence of finances for the procurement, because Ukraine and the Ukrainian government, they liquidated the market of gas, and there was the full commercial responsibility to provide the systems of heating and the private consumers with gas. This is with Naftogaz Ukraine. So we can also say that this is the problem that now is not in front of the gas sector, but also with the government. So we won't be able, how it was in the petrol sector, to use that. That will bring one truck or 2 trucks or 10 trucks and fill this deficit. So this gas will either to be bought by Naftogaz, or we won't have the gas. And this is also the prerequisite for the further discussion. Unfortunately, the alternative suppliers, we don't have to Naftogaz. That's why the amount of gas that we can procure via the western border is enough, but it's not limitless. So not later than July, we have to start active pumping of the gas. It's very good that Naftogaz already signed the first contract and testing the possibility to get the LNG, because the commercial risk that when Ukrainian national company will come to the market of Europe with the request for 5 billion or 4 billion cubic meters of gas and will start to quickly buy it, this will provoke price increase, and traders will be happy to act to sell high and will do everything possible to keep the gas prices at maximum this month. So it's important that Naftogaz will do an absolutely effective trading strategy, otherwise it will lead to a significant increase on European markets. This will not make us happy, and this will also make our European partners sad about it. Of course, they don't want that. And we can see already some price decreases, and this can be solved by expanding the geography of supplies and actively working with the potential suppliers of LNG in the countries of the West and from the United States of America. The next slide. So, what is in our opinion, which objectives are in front of us, and once again I will repeat in front of Naftogaz now, and in my opinion these are quite difficult jobs. First of all is the procurement of 4.5 billion cubic meters, which is a necessary minimum. This is from $2 to $2.5 billion. As far as I know, nowadays Naftogaz has conditionally free lending amounts in the amount of $450 million, and in case we quickly do the clearing and the so-called compensation of tariffs from the Cabinet of Ministers to Cabinet of Ministers and back, this can also free up some $1.5 billion for the potential. So this could free Naftogaz with some potential debts, so they can engage another 1 or 1.2 billion hryvnia. Not grant money, but credit money. I think this will be a very interesting item for our discussion, because the audience of our panel will help us to have this discussion. And the second item that is very little talked about, the discussion, this is the item about the necessity to engage money for the recovery, make backup equipment. Let us be honest, the new attacks on the facilities of gas production, they're absolutely real. They can take place, and we have to be prepared for that. So we need to buy equipment not only for the recovery of the already damaged, but also for the creation of the so-called backup reserve, emergency reserve. And for Naftogaz, it would be very interesting to learn the experience of Ukrenergo, which did the similar actions some 1.5 years before. It's also important to protect, defend critical objects. I heard a lot about different opinions, how can this be technically done, but when there were some discussions to defend high voltage structures, it was not possible. Nevertheless, the fortifications are working, and a huge number of attacks are brought to zero exactly with the fortifications of the high voltage facilities. We also talked about the necessity of the effective strategy, and I'm absolutely sure that in the nearest time, the government will be forced to think about reviewing the approaches to the special obligations that are today on Naftogaz, and to the situation that is fully, basically, is around in the gas sector. I'm talking about the absence of the market, full subsidizing of tariffs at all levels, and correspondingly full responsibility of the government for the provision of the country with gas, even though that the government is also limited in funds and doesn't have the resources for the quick mobilization of funds for this area. In case we talk about the presentation, that is it from my side. I'm very happy that we have guests today, and I would love to present them in turn, starting with some questions to every one of them, and correspondingly at the next stage to move to open discussion. I think everybody will have the wish to discuss these items that we're talking about. And in case you allow me, my first question definitely will be to Andriy Herus, the head of the Committee of the Verkhovna Rada for Energy. I know that the committee is very much in the picture. I know that already thematic meetings are done at the committee with the engagement and presentations of all stakeholders. So, Mr. Andriy, when we say about 4.5 million or billion cubic meters, and how do you see how Verkhovna Rada is able to jump in and to help the government and help Naftogaz to work in this area, because it's a very important part? Good afternoon, colleagues. Many thanks for your question. Definitely the committee, the Verkhovna Rada, and the parliamentaries are ready to connect, to help to solve those problems that are mentioned. We developed and we approved the draft law that would foresee the fixation of the difference and would also help us to pay back the difference in tariffs. But apart from that law, we also needed to introduce some changes into the law on state budget, and Ministry of Finances had their own remarks, and as an outcome, this project is not yet adopted, and the state budget doesn't foresee to compensate the difference in tariffs. We understand the problem of the liquidity and cash flow at Naftogaz, which I think is most critical for the procurement of gas. And of course, we understand the problem of economy, problem of tariffs. Of course, there was a decision, in my opinion. I don't really understand for what this needed to be done, but especially then, the priority were the governmental draft laws, and it foresaw the moratorium on increasing tariffs for gas and heat. I don't understand why this is for. If you don't want to increase these tariffs, just don't increase them. So the government would be not increasing it for gas, and NERC could be not increasing tariffs for heat. But why this should be limited by law? I don't know why this was done. It must have some media effect or something like that. But once again, it's in the law. It is now set in stone, the impossibility of any adjustment of tariffs. Therefore, these are our realities nowadays, and especially now, it's very difficult to change laws, and that's a huge political discussion at various levels, at various parties and fractions. When it comes to funds for the procurement, I know that Naftogaz is working with donors and with creditors. They have some agreements with EBRD. Hopefully we can hear about it today. I think they have some agreements with the Norwegian part, and correspondingly some necessary work is ongoing. So we'll be pushing this to make sure that the law on the difference, about the compensation of the difference in tariffs, would also be adopted, and the Ministry of Finances should hear us and should refuse from those arguments which are weak and are poorly justified. But in case the situation is difficult and it's necessary to react to it, so at some point in time the state budget would allocate some funds on the production of shelters, because this was important. So nowadays I would agree to something that has been said, that possibly it's not our first priority from the point of view of protection. So it's not electric energy energy that is of top priority, but rather it's gas. So the state and the state budget most likely have to participate very actively in it. And the difference in tariffs, that is something that needs to be done, because as the country said that the tariffs will not change, it's now the responsibility of the state, and the state should now compensate this difference in tariffs that has appeared. We will talk with the Ministry of Finances. Hopefully we can reach some compromise in terms of improve the financial condition and the liquidity of Naftogaz, and this will allow us to allocate additional resources for the procurement of gas. In case you have any further questions, we'd be happy to answer. Thank you. Of course, the questions will come. I would like to now bring everybody in the picture, and I would like to ask now the Deputy Executive Director of EBRD in Ukraine, Artem Shevalev. Artem, what is your assessment of the situation? I wouldn't want to reply now on behalf of EBRD. Just reply as a banker, to the extent that the bankers are now, and under which conditions you would be ready to give lending of such procurement of gas. What needs to be done in order to catch up quite quickly to mobilize the funds? Thank you so much, Oleksandr. Thank you for this question. I will try to answer, although, of course, it's quite a sensitive topic. Look, the bankers don't like to be in a hurry. So, in the first place, in this situation, to a certain extent, it is a shame that we have to solve this in a fire protection mode, fire extinguishing mode, because I will not tell you any secrets. EBRD for quite a long time is cooperating with Naftogaz. It's our existing client. Even after the start of the full-scale invasion, we had, I think, 2 projects with them aimed at financing the procurement of gas. And last year, we basically started the conversation with the company that, look, in case you have some needs, there were certain forecasts that were used at that moment. Somehow they certified to the absence of the acute need in financing. So I'm very much happy that we are coming back to this conversation several months down the road. Several months ago, many thanks to my colleagues from EBRD, but also the colleagues from Energo and Ministry of Finances and Naftogaz that could prepare that lending instrument that Andriy has mentioned. Hopefully that it will be, this agreement will be completed in the next few days. It's $270 million loan and 140 million grant from our Norwegian partners, the money that will be transferred via EBRD quickly, but not enough. So we said that really now the deficit, the need for financing is in around 1.2 billion, and how to close this. So all of us are now thinking very heavily. So the main question here, in case we're just being very pragmatic and just with the financial, how to guarantee these risks? Because this is a loan, we have the borrower, and we have to mitigate and calculate the risks of this borrower. In the real world, I mean, yes, it's a big company, a national leader, so theoretically we could talk about lending just using a commercial basis. But once again, we just recollected about difficulties with the compensation of difference in tariffs. So look at Naftogaz as the super commercial company. It's a difficult story. So this 250 million that will be now given as lending, that will be used by using the sovereign Ukrainian guarantee, but we clearly understand that this resource is mostly already exhausted, because in the IMF program, and we have to remember about it, we have some rigid limitations, also in terms of the state guarantees that are accessible to the Ministry of Finances. Yes, this $270 million resource was produced, but we were quite creative in terms of finding out this resource. and talking about more significant volumes that would be necessary now. I believe that an evident resource has to be our cooperation with the European Union. That is not a ready-to-go solution. This is the discussion that still lasts, but taking into account basically the geopolitical prospects of Ukraine for the EU accession, taking into account that any risks of energy of Ukraine, they to a significant extent can influence the European markets or the European energy security. So it seems to me that the European Commission should have looked at the possibility to use their guarantee resource in a very big priority in order to cover the risks of Naftogaz as the borrower. Talking the plain language, there is the banking resource, there is EBRD, there is EIB, there are other lenders who are ready to make lending to Naftogaz, I think at very attractive conditions, but with the condition that there is the availability of guarantee coverage of these risks on behalf of the European Commission. In case we have such a political decision, then I believe the question of the mobilization of these funds in order to get into this season in spring or in summer, I think this possibility is here. And very briefly, we talked about the influence on prices, the influence on the market. I don't know, I looked at it very quickly. In 2024, the general European import market was 190 billion cubes. So I don't think that our additional 4.5 billion cubes would make a significant story, that they would really influence the market and significantly influence the prices. But we have to, of course, keep that in mind. Thank you so much for your reply. A very short remark. 5 billion cubic meters from the spot market, that's a quite significant, in case these are short-term contracts. I was going to ask the following question to Nataliya Boyko, but the reply of Artem made me change the scenario now and not to hear the thought of Mr. Torsten as the advisor of the EU representation about the idea that Artem has just mentioned of these political guarantees for the procurement of gas, maybe some other instruments. And my question is actually composed of two parts. In the first place, do you feel the taste of these decisions? You can already feel it in the European Commission. Can we already expect them? And secondly, is there any small even chance that it will be adopted, let's say, until July? Is this realistic at all to consider the situation as such? Mr. Torsten, the floor is yours. Many
I will give you one out speaking English here. Yes, thanks a lot for this interesting introduction and discussion. Actually, when Russia started to massively attack gas production infrastructure, we had an emergency meeting with Naftogaz, with international partners, and actually this was exactly the way that Artem proposed, which we also suggested to Naftogaz, to mobilize funding via IFIs, because that is also the way that normally the EU works and the European Commission can operate. So we have what we call the Ukraine investment framework, where the European budget guarantees to IFIs, to partner IFIs, or takes the risk from partner IFIs. And I know that this suggestion was taken up immediately, so there are ongoing discussions, not only with EBRD and DG Enist in Brussels, or the European Commission, exactly about topping up Ukraine state guarantees, which have limitations, by EU guarantees, backed up by the EU budget. So that is on the way. I know that also discussions are going on with EIB to have a higher volume and to do it in a separate sort of tool. I remember in 2014, 15, when we had massive problems with gas supplies, We really had a mobilization of IFIs, of the European Commission. I think it was also World Bank involved, etc. And it was linked to a really big push by the government, which made it a top priority. And what we have seen so far is more that we discuss it at the, let's say, at the technical level. So, you know, the experts from Naftogaz, from the Ministry of Energy, are talking to EBRD, EIB. There are ongoing discussions in Brussels on the EU guarantees for this. What I have not yet seen so far is the same level of political attention to make sure that people understand it's urgent. Because otherwise we end up in a situation that we did last year when essentially the storage levels over the summer when the gas is cheaper will be low. And then Ukraine will be forced to buy gas when it's expensive in winter. And that, of course, is not only very bad for energy security, but also for financial considerations, etc. So I think the technical groundwork has been done, or it's ongoing. People in Brussels, in the IFIs, in Naftogaz, etc., are definitely aware. But I just wonder, and I don't think, do we have anyone from the Ministry of Energy or Ministry of Finance in the panel? Because I remember in 2014-15, this was actually what happened when the government really made this a top priority to make sure that there will be, let's say, sufficient gas available for the coming winter. And I mean, this is, you talked about it in your introduction. You said very politely that this is the consequence of the Russian attacks plus the 2-year policy of Naftogaz. And that's true. Because even without the Russian attacks, if the winter would have been harsh, there would have been a problem. Ukraine would not have had sufficient gas in storage and would have to buy expensive gas on the European spot market in winter, which is not reasonable. So there's a fundamental problem how to ensure gas security, energy security for Ukraine in the new circumstances where essentially Naftogaz is the only player. And the policy of Naftogaz was clearly designed to minimize imports, but not to maximize energy security. And I think this is a question also, of course, to Nataliya Boyko, because she is in the supervisory board, but also to the government. How can the conditions be created that Naftogaz has another motivation, is not minimizing its expenses for import, but maximizes the energy security of the country. And
it's my chair.
Okay, sorry.
On this stage, question coming from me.
Sorry, yeah. So that may be another aspect, just another aspect on the financing. You had in your slide, it's not only about purchasing gas. And purchasing gas, the EU can support with guarantees, topping up the Ukrainian state guarantees. We will top it up with European state sort of guarantees to increase the volume, and then it can be done via financing with EBRD, EIB, etc. I just wonder if the urgency could be increased by the government. The second element is what you also mentioned in your slide is that we now have damages. So it's not, and we have the tool set. We have experience how to cope with that in the electricity sector, both on the transmission grid, but also on the power plants. And now we're in a situation where we need to use this tool set for the gas sector. And that should be another priority for the government. And there, the lead is with the Ministry of Energy, because we have an energy support fund, which works, which we have also now, let's say, even the changes in the US administration's policy, this 180-degree change, it did not impact it too much, so it works. And we will have additional funding for these kind of measures to increase Ukraine's energy security against Russian attacks. It can cover physical protection, it can cover stocks of critical equipment, repairs. It is very flexible. But the final decision on what gets a priority and what gets funded is with the Minister of Energy. So it is very important that the Minister of Energy prioritizes the gas sector, which is now a new requirement because so far we have only worked on the electricity sector. And the third consideration is, of course, but what also Herus mentioned, the whole questions of tariffs, etc. But I will not go into that.
Дуже дякую.
Many thanks. And naturally, Nataliya, it's a question to you as the member of the Supervisory Board at Naftogaz. You heard a lot of questions. I assume you will be responding, but I would like to ask you, once you reply, please recollect about one other small question. What is your plan B? Let us imagine it didn't work. We couldn't pump in the required gas. What shall we do? Thank you so much. Thank you to the previous speakers. If possible, let me start to gradually reply to the previous question, starting as the advisor to the Prime Minister in Energy, because I'm one of the few people who are working on the engagement of new financial instruments and are in difficult negotiations with our creditors related to the general energy package. That's why, in case we take specifically Naftogaz, so the first step that we did was the engagement of funds from EBRD. This was quite an easy step from the one hand, because this is not the loan for the project. We have now two types of products. We are working with banks in a more easy way. These are the products for liquidity, like we helped Ukrenergo, or the products for the procurement of gas. It's like we are working with Naftogaz, cooperating with EBRD. The only issue was to find the sovereign guarantee. We managed. There was the full understanding of the Ministry of Finances, and it was prioritized. And although this loan was not planned, but still was quite quickly reflected, and it was implemented. It was topped up by the Norwegians with the money that will go through EBRD. So first step is made. When we talk about the European Commission to use as the additional resource to top up the sovereign guarantees, this is a difficult issue. I'm working with the Ministry of Finances, Ministry of Economy, and of course with the team of Olga Zykova. The logic that we put in, that was discussed at the highest political level, was the following. The share of Ukraine facility will act as the guarantee from the European Commission and will basically act as the substitution of sovereign in order for us to make take some money for certain specific projects from the EIB. We also propose EBRD for the implementation of that Plan B that we have. That's also the block in energy, infrastructure, regional development, but we are mostly interested now in energy. So the pilot along this way, that is actually on its final stage, must have been the signing of the loan for Ukrgidroenergo for the valves and turbines, very down-to-earth loan, very much needed equipment about which we worked with the European Investment Bank for 2 years, and before that EIB signed a memorandum with the European Commission that would also guarantee this sovereignty. So the signing should have taken place last week in Brussels. At the end, EIB said that it would want additional guarantees or some sovereign coverage. So we're now a little bit at a loss. Yes, we continue negotiations. Our position is logical. It didn't change. And we thought that our partners fully understand. But our now biggest focus of attention from the Prime Minister as such, because this must have been the first pilot in the pipeline for 2 billion, with the potential top-up for Naftogaz, it's exactly what we said, this additional 500 million, because really that amount of sovereign we simply don't have, and we will not have because there are IMF limitations. So as of now, the second resource of engaging to Naftogaz, on which we worked, was the EIB. And specifically now, these negotiations are on hold, not because of the ineffectiveness of Naftogaz, Ukraine, or any suspicions. Of course, this is not the kind. The team is very much working actively and high quality. The problem is with EIB, who irrespective of the assurance from the European Commission and all written documents that attached. As of now, with their internal policy, they can't adapt in order to take on this risk on their bank. And just one day before signing, they started to propose to us additional mechanisms how to cover additional risks. For us, the situation is quite complicated. Basically, it's unacceptable for us because this was the state budget planned according to this. It's not only energy, it's all sectors. So it was quite significantly connected with the work of the Ministry of Energy, economic development, with the infrastructure block. So in this pipeline, we also have Ukrenergo, a very much needed loan, and Ukr also very much needed loan, and Naftogaz as well. So we're working very actively, but as of now, I don't have any positive news, and we will definitely be pressuring them. So our logic was the following: as soon as we make the mechanism of guarantees for the European Commission for the EBRD active, we will propose the same mechanism for the other guys. EBRD is a very comfortable partner. We are working very productively. I respect this team. They are ready to be flexible and adapt in the conditions of war. Of course, Naftogaz will count on making top-up with EBRD. So far, Naftogaz has its limits that allow that. In parallel to this, if we talk about the engagement of another funds, we also work with Ukrainian banks. There are also some limitation issues, and I believe that all present here understand what I'm talking about, but we are definitely working with this. Also, we have quite high-level negotiations with the engagement of the leadership of the state for the possibility of the grant involvement, engagement of the gas resource that we will pump into the gas reserves. It can be then either returned or sold, or then something to be done with it. So we have with Norway this negotiation with some other countries. So I can't say that the situation is hopeless. No, it's not. It is complicated. It does require lots of attention. Step number one was done, EBRD plus Norway, but I think everybody present knows that Naftogaz, after the first shellings, once they started to do, Roman Chumak started to act as the new CEO. They started to buy gas, use their own funds. They talked about procurement of gas not only by Naftogaz but also by Ukrtransgaz, a daughter company. So they didn't stop. The point is what we are additionally pouring in so that these volumes would be planned. As you said, there are no technical limitations. The through capacity in terms of Western interconnectors is comfortable, and for our work, even catching up with Moldova's volumes. Exactly. It's only about money and the speed of its arrival. I will also come back to this backup reserve. Naftogaz Group did have the emergency backup, not as much as Ukrenergo, but still they didn't have the experience of damages of the facilities, so it was quite difficult to evaluate this backup reserve. We had the backup reserve of the cable products. After the first 3 attacks, we exhausted it because the warehouse of this emergency stock, it had some logical limit for the company, of course. And at the moment when we started to do renovations, repairs, we started to buy additional.
Там є позиції і дороговартісні, які потребують окремого виробництва. Це є компресори малі, компресори великі.
Compressors, small and big. Also some equipment for the electric energy part. That's why the backup reserve is permanently created. It is expanded. We talked in much detail with specialists about it. Also, we have certain opinion in terms of what can be changed in the logic of gas supplies and the modules of quality of gas from the technical point of view in order to minimize risks, future attacks. Yes, it is also quite difficult work because on the one hand, we're talking about sticking to certain standards of quality for the gas, but from the other hand, we don't want to, of course, lose the possibility of sustainable production because you have to be very careful with boreholes to preserve their potential for the stable supply of the resource into the system. I would also like to briefly remind you that in the conditions of Naftogaz has become a little bit easier because the government also expanded PCO to Ukernafta. It's a little bit different, the price is different, but they also have a different cost. Their gas is higher than Naftogaz one, but it also a significant contribution to the support of the company in the condition of the special obligations. I would fully support the idea of Andriy in terms of activization of the pipeline about the difference in tariffs. I can see here a sort of leadership from the Vice Premier Kuleba. We talked to him, to his team. We started some new circle of discussion with the Minister of Finances. This resource is very much needed not only to our company, but also to the industry and to the regions. So we hope that this year we will be able to do this, and this logical, vicious circle will be broken, and the law will start working and will be moving further. Do you have any further questions? I will use my rights of the moderator in order to remind you about my question. Does Naftogaz have a plan B? Do we know when we don't pump 9.9 billion? Well, let's say we have 7. Is there a plan B in order to compensate the missing part, and whether this scenario is analyzed as such, also from the technical point of view, because it raises some technical questions to begin with, and to what extent, in your opinion, whether you're ready as Naftogaz, as a company, as a structure, to resist these challenges. Let me put it this way. The question is not whether Naftogaz has plan B. It's about Ukraine, whether Ukraine has a plan B. In my understanding, when we talk to colleagues, especially from the Ministry of Energy, and they do have a certain understanding, for instance, the gas transmission system operator will buy some resource on the internal market. They can take out from the reserves what is in the ownership of private owners, or can import. It would be more logical from the energy security to buy as import. In the same way, it seems to me, Naftogaz will use all the possibilities in order to pump in and to come into the season with the maximum comfortable format in terms of the field reserves storages. I was also talking to the Ministry of Energy that we would need some additional stimuli for the industry to buy at imports. And I think we can talk about some balances, some comprehensive approach from the point of view of the Ministry of Finances. And I know that there must have been an additional meeting, and this idea was somewhat liked. So they promised to discuss it. From the technical point of view, they have a lot of scenarios. Ukrzdobywanie and gas transmission system operators, they work a lot. There are some scenarios that are developed in terms of the types of attacks, different types of storages with different temperatures, the compressor-free mode, and this is something that started to be talked this year. Not everybody understands what it means, but it's important for us. So in case we say in very rough slang, so that we were sitting on the imported pipe and without pumping down, this was also technically good. Yes, it was much more expensive in terms of money, but I would always explain to colleagues that 1 cube of gas in the gas storage and the one that you are importing, it's not the same thing when you have to pump it in and there is the minus in the storage. Apart from mathematics, physics is also important in gas sector, and not always the economy is the queen. Unfortunately, without physics, the math is not a queen, so there are a lot of scenarios are written down. Some will pragmatically foresee some rigid measures to limit consumption. In my opinion, we should not afford that, because then it's more difficult to renew the consumption of gas. Compared to electricity, it's much more difficult technical point of view, from the technical point of view. So I believe we should be able to cope with it. Pumping plus imports, of course, much will depend on which tax will be. But from what we have seen now, how we are rebuilding, recovering, maybe this is not the highest quality of gas, but the speed of returning the flow into the pipe, plus the possibility to work in the compressor-free adaptive mode, it actually shows quite a resilience of the gas sector. From the point of view of the protection, Naftogaz has protected objects at the level first plus. Long discussions. I was traveling myself around different electric facilities. I was looking 2+, and once you come permanently to some meetings, you have this mental analysis of all types of technical solutions, and when sometimes you look at some objects, you understand, okay, this was the solutions of the first line, this is the second line, so now the types of shaheds are changing, so we will understand they become reactive, 12-channel, so they have significant changes. So the first solutions are not working, vice versa, they can even damage it further. So it's quite a complicated process. I'm very happy that I'm not the expert in the protection of energy objects, because consuming such a huge flow of information, even myself, I can't adequately evaluate the ratio between price and quality. We are all internally ready when we talk about isolators and some protectors. Of course, it's good to have a big warehouse than to put up something strange and high expensive. So Укргаздобывание facilities have the same systems. Our specialists, military specialists, security guys, everybody is working, and they are proposing some solutions are proposed, some is criticized, some are criticized, but this is the ongoing eternal process. They become better, we have to adapt, we become more resilient. So I don't have, in terms of protection, I don't have either the reply or the horizon. It's an ongoing process. Many thanks to you. It's very interesting and quite, in many cases, quite a full reply. Colleagues, we have a huge number of questions in the chat, but these questions, in essence, they come to like two branches, where, again, to take money and who we can give lending to, and the second line, what we could do to make sure that this lending would take place in reality and would be some achievable. Honestly, I don't want to talk about it. After what Nataliya has explained, we understand that the work is ongoing, and now our discussion with the work that is ongoing, I think this will not contribute to our conversation, but it can produce certain problems in case we go in there in our conversation. What I would really love now to ask, and in reality, this question came from Hlib Vyshlinsky, maybe I can give him the possibility to ask him himself, because this is the question that tortures me most. Thank you so much, Oleksandr. You see, we as expert and non-expert, we are the same. So I have a question more to economy rather than physics, because it's not very good that we came to physics, because physics starts to be discussed when some long-term things didn't work as we would want them to work. Of course, I understand the war and the such. Did you make any calculations, maybe Artem on the side of the bank, whether at all it was necessary to have lending for the procurement of gas from the point of view of cash flow, in case the prices for gas would be marketable and there would be no this PSO, because we seem like to discuss the symptoms of the problem, which has been created for quite a long time, way back until the war and until even COVID, and we're now heroically trying to sort it out. So, but I have this concerned that finally that these guarantees would not be then be sorting out with the funds of the state of Ukraine. I will expand this question, Hlib. In case the market would work, would we have this discussion if we would have independent traders, if the big buyers could buy directly into the storage? If that would be the real market, how it used to be in 15-16, would that discussion would be at all happening? This is the question to all speakers. Nataliya is already having her hand up, and then Artem and Torsten, maybe you can comment. I would like to start because I have one question which I would be also happy to hear the opinion of colleagues, so that's why I decided to be the first. So my answer is as follows. I truly believe that we should go to market prices, and I believe that Naftogaz that would help a lot and would help to balance the market. At the same time, in the present conditions, the payment discipline among the population and among the heat companies is quite high. It's almost 90% in all sectors. So I understand that for the time being, as a person who is doing a certain sphere, I mean, I'm not doing sociology. I mean, there are areas which I don't know. For instance, I don't know how the development of this market will influence the payment discipline of the people. The launch of the gas market that took place in 15-16 was my favorite, most favorite period of working with Naftogaz. The energy when you fight for the consumer, the energy when you're building up the market, starting the competition growing. You can see that the number of suppliers are growing every week, not even a month. So that is so interesting from the point of view of the professional challenges, from the point of view of these objectives, that I'm very much missing that period, and I really hope that we go back to it. At the same time, my internal question, which I've been thinking over since that time, it's as follows. I remember how we tried to use Naftogaz as the market maker at that time. At the same time, we had a significantly different situation because the gas networks belonged to private consumers, and there was no monopoly by the state on the base of consumers. And I still don't have the answer while I'm thinking a lot about it and discussing with colleagues how to make a market in the conditions when the state is a monopolist of the whole consumption base, is a supplier to the whole database of suppliers, and even has the last mile supplier. So I don't know how to do this. Once we go back to relaunching the market, I would really love to hear the potential, the thoughts. And again, answering Hlib's question, I would believe that we would partially involve lending. The question is at which conditions, for which terms, for the implementation of which projects, because Naftogaz is working quite accurately, quite professionally with the portfolio, including with external financing, not only Naftogaz, Ukrhydro, Ukernafta. So with the external suppliers, it's interesting to work, it's long-term money, and it's a certain benchmarking for your work. So for me to onboard Ukernafta and to get this sign of quality from EBRD, to accept the reporting of the company, it was even more important than 80 million. So answering Hlib's question, yes, we would work, but also answering the question, the market is definitely needed, but the question is how and when. I really hope too that we will come back to unbundling. We would need to repeat it in any case in the new format, in the new reality. We would need to once again go through this way, through unbundling, not during the war, but I really support you. That really stimulates. And I would like to clarify the question, because Hlib was asking not in general about lending, but rather emergency lending, because we need money here and now. Artem, please, the floor is yours. Yes, thank you, Oleksandr. Very interesting questions, by the way. And little time, many thanks, Nataliya, to remind us how old we are. You remembered the 15-16, but I recollected the beginning of 2000 when EBRD was witnessing the moving to the market rails, the electric market. You forgot, but the settlements of population for kilowatts was like 15-16%. We just simply forgot how it used to be, that the people were not just paying for electricity, but the changes have taken place after the unpopular decisions were approved about the commercialization of tariffs. Also, we had some talented managers in the government who said that electric energy must be almost free of charge, but thanks God we could push them back. So, the simple answer, would we have this conversation? It would be different. I would absolutely support Nataliya. We would talk about lending of capital expenses, because in this business you're engaging lending for this. Would we talk about the engagement of such huge amounts or any significant volumes for the financing or procurement of gas? Most likely not. Just because the nature of this market is quick money circulation. It's not even agribusiness. And you have the marketing year, and there could be several months where you can have this cycle. Have you received the gas? You've received some calculation, settlement for 1 month, and you're buying it again and again. So the war definitely has significant influence on all of this. But the question is whether we should come to the market prices and tariffs, market tariffs on the one hand, but from the other hand, we stay quite a poor country for the time being. So let us be honest, the war didn't make us richer, and that correspondingly gives birth to questions related to this social equality and any kind of compensatory mechanisms or the mechanism of subsidizing for the consumption of energy carriers from the vulnerable groups. Sounds like a populism, but it's not. It's a general, usual assignment for any government to provide for this social equality. But nothing better than the targeted subsidy. More than that, the subsidy, monetary subsidy, nobody invented anything better than that. So any mechanisms that start to work at the level of suppliers, at the level of artificially regulated prices, that never brought any good. Artem, thank you. Hlib, I understand that we have 4 minutes left until we finish our airing. Physically, nobody will kick us off from the air, so you want to delay, you can delay a little bit. Because in the first place, the floor is with Torsten, and would also like to hear him, but also see some very interesting questions in our chat, and possibly we can also 1 or 2 questions try to respond. Torsten, the floor is yours.
Just to add to what just has been said, we have, when we discussed the Ukraine facility with the government of Ukraine, there was an agreement, and it's the plan of the government of Ukraine to gradually limit the PSOs, the public service obligation, and to come to a social support for vulnerable consumers. So for the poor people who cannot pay the energy bills, or not only energy, utility bills, that they get targeted social support. And this is very difficult because it does not, I mean, it's essentially for at least half of the government, it's a task. And that is something which I think also you know, as expert community, you could try to monitor and to promote that this work is, especially from the economic point of view and social point of view, etc., is super important. It's complex, it takes time, and needs to start now. Because I think the deadline and the commitment of the government is 2027, but if it should have quality, it should be well prepared. And I think that could be a focus also of the expert community, no matter when the market will be relaunched. That's a fundamental condition, as you know, also Hlib and Artem said. And we have just in a much smaller scale, but because always the argument, well, Ukraine is poor. Look, Moldova is now doing this together with the European Union, and Moldova is not rich either. Okay, Moldova is not in a physical war. It's a different situation, but they understand that this is fundamental. And I think it should be actively led by somebody in the government, probably at vice prime minister's level, to make sure that the quality of this work will be fine.
Thank you. The idea about the usage of Moldova as a very interesting example, where the country, in essence, went through the way as is expected by Ukraine. It didn't collapse. They re-elected the president, and we, as the Center of Energy, we made a calculation that the Ukraine budget needs $6.5 billion for some targeted subsidies in case we introduce fully marketable tariffs for electricity, water, and gas, but at the same time to introduce targeted subsidies. And we calculated like 100% war participants, disabled people, the pensioners, so we could really come up with various types of population groups. So theoretically, this could be a very interesting discussion, what could cost to the budget this targeted subsidy, but at the same time, what it will bring, because it will also bring a lot of additional billions from taxes and from profits of the state-owned companies. So these are very interconnected things, and there will be no request to the EU, give us 6 billion a year. This will be much lesser amount that we would need to make these targeted subsidies. There is the ask from Victoria Hlib, the parliamentary. I would propose, in case it's possible, technically, to give this. Yes, now colleagues will add Victoria to the panelist, and she will be able to speak up. At the same time, I would quickly react to the last moment, 100%, but let's not forget that always our problem is the administration of the similar privileges or subsidies. To make sure that the subsidies are effective, they need to be really targeted. That would not be violation and manipulation. Of course, it's a separate job, but Ukraine has a very good basis in the form of DIA and digitalization, that we have now a very unique situation even for Europe, when digitalization in Ukraine is sometimes higher than many countries of the European Union. Victoria, please, the floor is yours. There was a pause. Many thanks. Thank you for this discussion to begin with. So I heard a lot, but you know what was missing. So how we are going to develop the production in Ukraine for the future? What we are doing that our producers in this area would not be out of the market, and what we are doing in order to engage new ones. Because I understand it's very important how we'll go through the next heating season. But once again, in case we have these limitations that we have nowadays in Ukraine, the market will not develop, whatever we do. Nataliya Boyko touched on the issue about the quality of the gas. Do we know that nowadays, in case our gas production companies provide quality that is somewhat lower mentioned in the standards, they pay quite huge penalties, and that limits them. Therefore, it's necessary for us to look at how to motivate so they would produce more in Ukraine, because that would be a vicious circle, and no matter how many loans we would take, that will not help us. Colleagues, thank you. If possible, then you could comment also on this question. Victoria, thank you for the remark. I believe that just briefly, I will comment that we absolutely support the development of the Ukrainian production, and there is still a lot of work to be done, but it's a separate discussion to begin with. So in case Center of Economic Strategy would be interested to initiate the discussion about the development of the Ukrainian gas production, or how we can move to the targeted subsidies in energy, I think that would be of great interest to many to support such a discussion. But of course, colleagues, it's your decision. When it comes to, I will take the bravery to reply about the quality of the gas. It's not very straightforward. It's been dragging for many years. We know that Ukrainian gas is much less the standards. even adopted for our gas networks. They were adopted for the gas that we imported from Russia, much more dry, much more clean. That's true. But from the other hand, if we just allow to use the usage of gas without the necessary purification, without the necessary standards, then the consumer will suffer because the calorific value of the gas will be 25–30% less, so people will be burning more gas to get the same energy. So you voted to move to megawatt from 1,000 cubic meters, and then it will be much more simple and actual, the discussion about other parameters. It will simply simplify. That's my quick first reply that comes to my mind. Oleksandr, if possible, I understand what you're talking about, but these limitations and penalties, really, it's a break to make sure that the market would develop. Let's really have a separate discussion what needs to be done for us to survive within this period, in case we are so much necessary to move and to really go through this period. That's number one. Number two, understand what you're talking about. The only thing that possibly we need to study those standards, because they will consume more, it's clear, but they will be also paying more. But in case the gas production companies nowadays will be simply paying penalties, nobody will come to us, to our market. Just put across. We understand that there is the need in some additional discussion, the big one, and honestly, we have been talking a lot today, and it seems to me that there was a very intensive discussion, and I will bring back the microphone to Hlib, and we can come. I can only thank everybody. It's a very interesting discussion with Oleksandr. We started quite a long time. We started as economic journalists. So in case there would be any journalists, we would take a lot of interesting news and better understanding what is expecting us with the gas component of the energy security this year and in winter next year. Many thanks to all who have participated, all the participants and all who stayed, Artem, Torsten, and of course Oleksandr, for you, that you have helped us to really professionally prepare this topic. So many thanks to everybody, and I would like to wish that at least in the nearest days during Easter, that these risks that the President said today about the possible new blows on energy infrastructures would not be implemented, and we would go through the holidays in a safe way. Many thanks. Thank you, colleagues.